Sunday, August 25th, 2019. I submit to you my first address to the Cattlemen Association. That's right. A short talk to cattle men, cattle barons, if you please. This message is a byproduct of last week's sermon, in which I mentioned a preacher was found and observed preaching to cows in a pasture. And that topic has been on my mind for the entire week. And I thought I'd try to dispose of it in a sanctified and holy way. But I must say that this is not a gospel sermon. It is not a gospel sermon in any means or ways. Instead, it's a short talk to cattle producers. Now, in order to remind myself and to remind you that I am not preaching a gospel sermon, I elected to put on a special shirt. The shirt that I'm wearing was purchased at the National Baptist Convention, which was held in Birmingham, Alabama, probably 1993 or somewhere in there. But the shirt reminds me and reminds you that this is no ordinary Lancaster sermon. I always wear a necktie when I come to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today is different, and it is totally and completely Holy Spirit directed. And I will say to you that it's all right for a preacher to give a short talk to cattlemen. If it's all right for a preacher to preach to cows, you know it's all right for a preacher to preach about cows. And that's what I'm doing. This shirt says, "Danger, educated black man." Down at the bottom block it says, "My lethal weapon is my mind." And beneath that it says, "I thought you already knew." Danger, educated black man. I'm taking special liberties today, sort of a vacation day, in a manner of speaking, because I'm approaching a couple of weeks another church anniversary. Lord, let me live to see it. I'm going to have a big time celebration. Let me hurry on to the message and tell you that last Sunday I told a story about a preacher that was found preaching to a herd of cattle. And when he was asked the reason why, he said, "God called me to preach the gospel to every creature. These cattle are creatures, and they need to hear the gospel preached. They need to have the gospel preached to them." That story brought to my mind other stories, landmark stories I've heard and read about cattle. And so today I beg your indulgence and your tolerance as I try to wiggle my way through, as I try to feel my way through this unprecedented short talk to cattle producers. After carrying this burden all week, it was Friday night at about 10 o'clock that I located or found the page in one of my books that told a memorable story about cattle. Before I'm done with this message, I will read a brief passage from that book. Last Sunday, I said that I kind of felt like I was preaching to cows. Well, the more I thought about that statement, the better I began to feel. And I want to submit to you that cows are not crazy. And they have more sense than a whole lot of people. I watch them. And I'm particularly impressed with the herd instinct. When they start grazing, they are united. They graze in one direction. Let me go on and tell you that you may not be able to relate to this because you may have grown up in the city. And city people, especially children, some of them, have never looked at or never seen a real live cow. They are culturally different from us country folk down here in Alabama. And I'll give you an example. A few days ago, a childhood friend of mine by the name of Buddy Johnson, who lives in Boston, Massachusetts, came home for the Alabama Day, and he had with him his 35-year-old son. And my classmate and his first cousin, Roy Johnson, brought Buddy and his son by my house for a short visit. Immediately I said I knew who he was. It had been years since I saw him. But I said to him, Buddy, you look like you're about 35 years old. And I know that can't be so. He said, yes, Frank, I am 77 years old now. So I took them to the backyard right away and took them to the fig tree. And Buddy's son, born and raised in Boston, had never so much as seen a fig tree or a pear tree on account of culture. So I gave them some figs and some pears. Here in Alabama, the culture is so much different from the New England area. I've lived in New Bedford, and I've visited Boston, Providence, Rhode Island, went to the Newport Jazz Festival, went all the way up to Cape Cod, Providence Town in Cape Cod. So I spent a little time in the New England states up there, but it's just a different culture. I say to you that beef production, cattle, is a major industry in Alabama. And I tell you that I cannot drive 10 miles in any direction from my home without viewing cattle pastures. I am told that there is a high profit margin in beef production. And I tell you, I go to the grocery store, I can feel that profit margin. I look at the filet mignon, the ribeye steaks. God knows I love hamburgers and cheeseburgers. Say nothing about prime rib and that chuck roast with the carrots and celery and potatoes. No, I love that. And then those beef ribs wrapped up in aluminum foil and seasoned and spread over with tomato ketchup and put in the oven for an hour and a half until that beef just falls off the rib bone. So delicious. And I will tell you this. I will walk a country mile just to get 2 pieces of tripe, T-R-I-P-E, fried right, R-I-G-H-T, by Janice Edwards. Yes, I love myself some tripe. God knows I never will forget that Chateaubriand I had at Anthony's restaurant in San Diego, California. Yes, I'm a beef eater all right enough. And every now and then I'll pick up a calf liver, a beef liver. Bought 6 New York strips last time I went to the grocery store. They don't sell porterhouse cuts in this area. But when I lived in Southern California, that porterhouse was my main steak. Round these parts, poor fella like me, just always buy that chuck eye steak. That's poor man's filet mignon, poor man's Chateaubriand. Let me hurry up and get on out of this message. 12 minutes are gone. But now I want to submit to you that there was a time here in Alabama that if a black man wanted to get top dollar for his cattle, he'd have to get a white man to sell them for him. You may ask, why? I'll tell you why. Because of racial prejudice, white racism. I better stick to the script. I want to detour so bad I don't know what to do. But I will detour a moment and tell you what I want you to do. I want you to get on your computer, your Android phone, your iPhone, whatever method and means you use to get on the internet. I want you to go online. This is about cattle now. And Google a Nova movie entitled The Deadly Deception. Inside the first frame of that movie, the first 5 minutes, you will see a bunch of cattle. A bunch of cattle being led by Herman Shaw. And I think Nova and the federal government, the movie-making industry, should award posthumously to Herman Shaw a Grammy for his outstanding acting performance in the movie entitled The Deadly Deception. Here's a brief scene from it, as I remember it. Herman Shaw lived around Tuskegee, Alabama. The movie was produced in Alabama. And it's a real, live, true movie. It's no fiction, no Hollywood drama, just real, live, true story. But I saw Herman Shaw in this movie drive his old beat-up pickup to the barn, took 2 5-gallon cans and went in the barn and filled them with corn. The cattle, it was feeding time, and they accustomed to following his truck up to the barn. And the cattle evidently had been trained to stay at a distance from the barnyard, from the barn door. So as he got the corn and put it in the back of the truck, he had one ear of corn in his hand. This is Herman Shaw. I mean, supreme acting. And as the cattle stood there waiting for direction from Herman Shaw, he had that one ear of corn in his hand. And he held that ear of corn out and he said, "Joe." All the cattle stood still, but there was a black cow named Joe. It came up to Mr. Shaw, took the ear of corn out of his hand from his mouth. You got to see it to believe it. But those cattle had good sense. And there's one named Joe. When his name was called, he came up, and no other cattle moved. You got to see that. But this brings me to a story I will share about cattle. Story that was told in the First Baptist Church by the late Reverend Amos Jones. Reverend Jones was a moderator of the First Mount Pleasant District Association, and he pastored Gillfield Baptist Church for a number of years. And he matriculated, if you will. He studied at the historic Black Baptist College known as Selma University. Some of you all will pick up this message, been to Selma University, attended Selma University. But that was Reverend Jones' school. Reverend Jones reared a son who became a brain surgeon. This is about cows now. This is not gospel preaching. This is storytelling. A brain surgeon. Product, Baptist Church, country preacher. And I tell you that I have a medical school neurology textbook on my bookshelf. And I had the occasion to review that textbook at my eye doctor, Dr. Leroy Maxwell, wanted his friend, who's a neurologist, to look at that nerve between my left eyeball and my brain to see if there was any pressure being exerted on that optic nerve. If there had been pressure exerted on that optic nerve, I would have had an aneurysm. So Dr. Leroy Maxwell referred me to neurologist Wally Tridge over in Selma. And I took that neurology textbook with me to my appointment with Dr. Fridge. And I showed it to him. Dr. Fridge said, "Yeah, this is the medical school textbook that I used when I was in med school." He said, "It's an old edition. I'm preaching about cows now. I'm teaching about cows. This is a short talk about cows. Just taking a backdoor approach." Thank God there was no pressure being exerted on that optic nerve. But here's what Reverend Jones had to say to the members and to the visitors and to the congregation at the First Baptist Church here. He said that a cow will grow just as good for a black man as it would for a white man if he feed the cow. The point is that in the wintertime, when grass stopped growing, grass is no longer green, well, cows have to be fed. I promised you that I would read you a passage or a paragraph about cattle from one of my books. I got to hurry up and get out of here. The book is a Penguin classic. The author of the book was born in the year 106 BC, and he died on December 7th, 43 BC. He left the scene 43 years before Jesus came. The writer of this book was a governor of Cilicia in southeastern Asia Minor in the year 51 BC. The title of the book, a Penguin classic, is Cicero on the Good Life. Cicero on the Good Life. They called Cicero Tully, but I better hurry up and give you a side note on pronunciation. Some people pronounce his name Cicero. And they render the R in his name silent. Others pronounce it Cicero. Whether you choose to call him Cicero or Cicero, same man. And I want to recommend this book to that Atlanta, Georgia preacher, Welton Edwards. Showed me a video of this Atlanta, Georgia preacher preaching. But I want this Atlanta, Georgia preacher, Welton know who I'm talking about. I want this preacher in Atlanta to get this book because it's a book about oratory. The sublime art of oratory. This old Georgia preacher wanted to jump on me at the National Baptist Convention when it was held in Los Angeles, one of those late night meetings, and he was conducting the preaching workshop, teaching the preachers about hooping. And I stood up and said, I don't recall Dr. Martin Luther King being a hooping preacher. He wanted to jump on me, cut my throat. That old Georgia preacher, I ain't gonna call his name. Oh, yes, he was. Oh, yes, he was. Disagreed with me. Mister, you need to learn the art of oratory. Welton, see if you can get that message to him. Cicero on the Good Life. The pronunciation of that name is like the well-known street that runs through Beverly Hills and into part of Los Angeles. Some people call it Rodeo Drive. Others call it Rodeo Drive. Same street. It's time for me to take my seat. So here is the quote from the book. It says, incidentally, that is the sort of comparison which old Cato the censor was dealing with when they asked him what he believed to be the most important activity on a country estate. Raising cattle profitably, he said. Asked again what came next, he answered, raising cattle fairly profitably. And his third priority was raising cattle unsuccessfully. Now unto him who's able to keep us from falling, he's able to present us faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding great joy. The only wise God, to whom be glory, majesty, dominion, and power, both now, henceforth, and forevermore. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. Whew, the fellowship, the joy divine, as we lean on the everlasting arms of Jesus. I love Jesus. Jesus loves me. I know Jesus. And thank God, Jesus knows me. Goodbye.